I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister and Canada's longest-running #1 radio talk show host, and most importantly, the most prominent political commentator in Lions Bay, BC. Welcome to the show, Rafe.
Thanks very much, Jim. Nice to be here.
People are asking, is it fair for Premier Christy Clark to also be gathering in a salary from the BC Liberal Party? After all, she does charge $20,000 a plate if you want to have dinner with her.
Well, I think it was put very well by Gary Mason to begin with. And then, again, I shouldn't say this because I've forgotten the name of the author in the Tyee today. But they both draw a very interesting connection. It isn't just as if the Liberal Party was taking money out of a sack behind a rock somewhere and giving her money. That money comes from people who want things done by the government. I mean, there's just no question about that. You don't have to look very hard to connect the dots. And I made a comment in the Tyee this morning. I mean, surely nobody would think that Bob Renning or any of those people would want anything for all that money they give her, or that Christie would play the game. Surely not. Well, of course, that's exactly what people see. Now, again, it's kind of like the complaint I made recently about the Governor General in Mulroney. You can't say that's what happens because you don't know. You haven't got proof. But it doesn't pass the smell test, not by a long shot. And it just seems to me that if Christie's getting money from the Liberal Party above and beyond her salary from the government, then that's wrong. And it's wrong because it looks like it's wrong. Whether it is or not, that's neither here nor there. It looks terrible.
I was wondering, would she have lunch with you if you didn't pay her $20,000?
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't know whether she would or not. I don't dare say that, no. But I wouldn't pay her $20,000 for anything. Because I'm not likely to need much influence. But I don't know, I guess people think that that's a good idea. But one thing you got to know for sure, Jim, nobody's going to be paying $20,000 to a premier or anybody else unless they think they're going to get something back for it. I mean, these people aren't charitable institutions, and they know very well that if they do that, they've got some influence. Otherwise, why would they do it? So I think you have to assume that there is a connection. The dots are connected, and it looks like hell, and it just should not happen. And I'm not surprised that Christie does it. If you are amoral, then you don't concern yourself with those sort of things. And we've had amoral people in politics before that don't seem to connect those things, and they'll always be there. But there's no question about it in my mind that it's wrong.
Well, Premier Bill Vander Zalm accepted an envelope stuffed with $20,000 in cash once, and that didn't work out well for him. Well,
that's a very good point, too, because there was nothing illegal about that money. That money was essentially going to go to buy Bill's theme park. However, the whole thing leading up to it stunk. He was entertaining this purchaser at Government House and on public funds, et cetera, and it just looked lousy. Normally people don't go into hotel rooms in the middle of the night with bags full of money to hand to somebody else. That's just not the way business is done. And that's the same thing that I've been talking about with the Governor General and Mr. Mulroney and Harper. Mulroney, the people that are defending him say, oh, well, you haven't proved anything. Well, I don't know that you have to prove anything. You just don't have former prime ministers who have dealt with somebody on a huge Airbus deal going into a hotel room in New York City and taking out a bag with $300,000 without it looking lousy. And that's exactly the same thing here, and that's what happened to Bill Vander Zalm. No matter how he explained it, it just looked terrible, and he paid for it. He paid the price. But I guess Christie won't. She's one of these people that doesn't look like she ever pays a price.
Should there be a limit on how much corporations and unions can donate to governments or parties, or should you put a limit or ban it?
Oh, I think that has to come, Jim. I'm a little bit of an amateur political scientist, and I've always very much admired the American Constitution, how it's set up, etc. However, the problem with it is money has got in there and has ruined it, and they might just as well have the worst Constitution ever invented. And that's what's happening here. And the federal government have done something along that line, although I suspect that there's money under the table that still gets there. But if you don't get that kind of money out of the system, then the system is always going to look very, very bad. And, Jim, I would make the case that we have corporatized our governments, both in the United States here and a lot of other places, where the corporations are actually running the government and actually have the legislators in their hip pocket. And if this doesn't change, then it's going to be a tragedy for the people. And I say that, be specific. I think the oil companies, the pipeline companies, that sort of thing, I think that they have the legislators on their side, not because the legislators love them or think that they're marvelous, but because that's where the dough comes from. And once you have that going, you only have a very a mild sham of a democracy that's left, and we have to do something about that.
Is it mistrust of politicians and their corporate connections that have people liking Trump or Bernie Sanders in the U.S.?
I didn't hear the first part of that. I'm sorry, Jim.
I was going to say, is it distrust of the connection between big corporations and politicians that have people enamored with Trump and Bernie Sanders in the U.S.?
Well, I don't know whether that's true with Trump and Sanders. I think in Trump's case, there is an enormous anger that the people have, and it's probably at people like Trump, but they don't realize that it's really Trump they're mad at. He's the one person that looks like he might be able to do something for them. But there's no question about it. I think you're onto something here. The system has become discombobulated because of money, and it's in the back of people's minds that they no longer have any direct influence on what's happening in government because other people are buying favors, and this is going to stop. And if anybody comes along, even a multi-billionaire, that looks like he might stop it, even though it's preposterous to think that he would, you're going to support him. And it's just rotted the whole system in the States and here. I'll tell you one thing, Jim, very quickly, a little off the subject, but I took the time to watch the reproductions of the dinner, the presidential dinner the other night. They're going to miss Obama. There's a guy with some class. He's a great stand-up comedian, articulate, and I think that he's done a pretty good job considering what the Republicans did to him and given the time he's had. However, that's not going to last because no matter who gets in, I think it's going to be different.
Well, even if Trump won, the Republican Party hates him. So would the Republican senators and congressmen support him anyway? Well,
it's a funny thing about winning, Jim. That puts a lot of those things behind you. It's amazing who you can get along with if you win, and if they are going to be able to do good things for you. Now, but it is a fair question because there's no doubt about it. The party brass hate him. Now, what Congress itself would be like if he does win, and he does have a Republican Congress, that's an open question. But I think most people go into Congress that see they might profit by being on the president's side, will be on the president's side even though they don't like him. And of course, the reverse is true too. They'll be against him for no good reason either. But Trump is such a one-off. I imagine, Jim, in your business, you could ask 100 people, and even 100 people that knew something about this, and get 100 different answers because we have nothing to go on. There's no precedent for a guy like this.
Well, Trump says what the people want to hear, and a lot of politicians do that. But people I have talked to who have done business with Trump say you won't find a sharper mind out there, at least when it comes to business. Running a country, of course, is totally different.
Well, that's true, and I think that he probably is, although he's, well, like any entrepreneur, he's had his failures. But he's not a wizard at politics either. He's got the female population thoroughly pissed off at him. Now, whether that's got staying power or not, I don't know. Maybe the ladies, when they go to the polls, will say, "Oh, I don't like him very much, but he's better than the alternatives." But you know, he's not been flawless in these pronouncements. But he has found a way to get people who are angry to feel that he's the guy that's going to be the person that helps them out, that's on their side. And if you can get politicians, get people thinking that he's on their side, he's 90% of the way home.
Well, I thought Obama was gracious in his last press gallery dinner in that he invited people like Trump. They didn't show up, but the president of the Republican Party, the chair of it, was there. And I thought, because sooner or later you're going to end up having to work with these people.
Well, I got to say it again. Obama is a class act, and what we're seeing around us now is not particularly. I'm not saying that Bernie isn't a class act or Hillary, but they're not in the same league. They're I think closer to the old parish pump politicians. And I believe that people. Well, I think, for example, the games that Obama is playing with the Queen and the young prince. That's fun. People like that. They think, now there's a guy that can walk with peasants, that can walk with queens. That's our kind of guy. And I think that that's going to be sorely missed.
Well, and the Queen, of course, showing her sense of humor. How many regents who have lasted as long as she has would feel that way? Well,
I think that's true. I think and there's probably a good time to say it. I've never been the most devout of royalists, and over my long life, I'm not somebody that thinks it's the world's greatest idea. But this lady has been fantastic. She really has. She's due all the praise. She's entitled to all the praise that she's getting, and do more. And I, for one, am very happy that I was alive to see her be the Queen for that long. And we're almost contemporaries, and it's been very good to see. She's been fantastic.
Well, my mother-in-law signed up for the armed forces in Britain during the Second World War at the same time the Queen did. And the Queen was not an officer. She was an enlisted person, something totally unheard of in royal annals since then or before.
Well, that's right. She was a mechanic on trucks and that sort of stuff, did dirty work, tough work, and as you say, was not an officer, had no special privileges, and good on her. I think it was great.
Well, that's why she's not scared to take the Range Rover out. She can fix it.
Yeah, well, that's right. I wonder whether Philip can, but I'm sure she can.
We'll have more with Rafe Mair right after the break.
Unbelievable harmony, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band coming to West Vancouver Friday, May 6th at the K-Meek Center. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
In Goddard we trust.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rafe Mair. Rafe, Senator Mike Duffy acquitted of all criminal charges in connection with his expenses. Now, perhaps, now that he's returned to the Senate as a full-fledged member, there might be talk of Senate reform. Should these people be elected? Should there be a new way to appoint them? Should they be more accountable?
Well, there are a number of questions involved in that, and I'm glad you asked those ones because I think they're the important ones. The behavior of individuals, it really is secondary because no matter how good an institution you have, you always run the risk that bad things are going to happen. But I'm firmly of the view, Jim, that Canada must have a Senate. And I say that, frankly, from some pretty solid experience along that line. As some people would know, I was BC's minister responsible for the Constitution back in the days of the patriation of the Constitution, and all of these issues came up and were talked about by cabinet ministers, federal and provincial, right across the country for a matter of about 4 or 5 years. And so I got pretty well grounded in this, and I'm convinced that you have a problem with this country with too much geography, and it's a real tough thing to keep a country like that together. Now, having said that, the Senate we have now could not be worse. Every single solitary thing about it is wrong. Its representation is wrong. The appointment of it is wrong. The fact that it's appointed by the federal government to represent the provinces makes no sense whatsoever, and so on and so forth. However, you shouldn't let that deter you from having a good Senate, starting all over again. Now, I've got to tell you, that's not going to be easy. A couple of reasons for that. Ontario and Quebec love the Senate the way it is. They dominate it. They control the damn thing. So why would they want to have any kind of a change? And a lot of the provinces don't care. They're indifferent to it because they see the Senate as having no possible use. But for a province like British Columbia that is left out of the governing process in Ottawa because of its population, a fair representation in the Senate is the only way you're going to do it. Now, there are a lot of models to go on. The United States model of 2 per state, and I'm trying to remember how many it is per state in Australia, but same in Germany they have a kind of what we call unbalanced, I suppose. It's not a precise amount for each of the states. It's loaded, but it's not loaded that much. It's pretty well equal. But those things are important to keep a federation with a lot of land in good working order. And I think that's what we should be doing now. Now, I realize that's not very popular. A lot of people just say, "Oh, to hell with it. Throw it out. We don't need it." Well, you should be very careful when you throw things out that you're not going to regret doing that in due course. And I think the Senate's got to be reformed. On Duffy itself, it's shameful that these charges were laid. I mean, I have no time for what Duffy did, etc. I know Mike, and he's not all that bad a guy, but I think he, obviously went way overboard in expenses and everything, and it shouldn't be an excuse to say, well, everybody else does it. But the fact of the matter is they did, and everybody knew that the Senate was doing these things, and to try to weigh it down with 31 bloody charges and that sort of thing, and 63 days of trial, is just, to me, an abusive process. And I'm glad that the judge laid the wood to the prosecution, because I think they damn well deserved it. And I frankly hope that Mike gets paid the time that he was away. But in any event, it did not shine well on Canadian justice, particularly when you took a look at the Governor General issue that I've been raising the last few days, where Mr. Mulroney was given a free ride by Mr. Johnson, who shortly thereafter became the Governor General. Those sort of things make justice look lousy. And as I said in an earlier context, you don't have to prove that that's wrong. It just doesn't pass the smell test. The average guy or gal having a beer, looking at those situations, Duffy and the Governor General, etc., and listening to what the facts are going to say, I betcha this happened. And when you get down to that, you've lost respect for either the judicial system or the Governor Generalship or the Prime Ministership or whatever it may be. And you've got to be careful about those things. And I think those are two very good examples of where appearances have just been awful. And I'm glad that, as I say in Duffy's case, that it turned out the way it did.
The judge, in his ruling in favor of Duffy, really slammed the Prime Minister's office, and I would guess in that case the Prime Minister himself, saying basically Duffy was held up as a political scapegoat to deflect any attention that might be put on the Prime Minister's office for what happened.
Well, there's no question about that. I mean, the Prime Minister himself comes out of that thing just looking awful, and I think in a sense, too, it exposes the PMO, which has always run things in Parliament to the extent that it's unhealthy. And I think we've now seen what's happened what prime ministers do with people that work for them, what they tell them to do and what they have to do. But there's no doubt about what you just said is right, Mike, Jim. Duffy proves absolutely that Harper was just a terrible prime minister, and that the whole system leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, it also seems to me lately there's been court ruling after court ruling striking down legislation that Harper passed, legislation concerning environmental hearings, legislation involving mandatory jail terms for relatively minor offenses, jail terms for postal workers who oppose the back-to-work legislation. All these changes, were we glad or lucky to get rid of a government that passed laws that have since been declared unconstitutional?
Well, I think it has exposed the present Conservative Party, not the Conservative Party I knew when I was a little younger, and my friend John Fraser and Flora MacDonald and people like that were in it. That was an entirely different party, and I hesitate to use the word, Conservative Party to tar them all with the same brush. But this Conservative government, with its hang-em-high, right-wing, far right-wing Conservative attitude, has just, I think, put itself in a terrible position, and it's got the Supreme Court of Canada working overtime, and they'll continue to work to make it right. People say, oh, well, yeah, we should put people in jail. Think about that for a second. Load up jails with people that are committing minor crimes, keep them there for God knows how long, the cost of it, and what it does to them emotionally, what happens to their families. The whole thing just doesn't make any sense. And the other thing, too, that comes out of the Duffy trial and so on, is people think, I know a lady down the street, and she cheated a little bit on her welfare, and she went to jail, and those bastards aren't going to jail. So the whole thing coming out of the Conservative regime is that the little guys get hit, and that the big guys get away with it. And we've got a lot of amending to do there because, again, the whole system does not pass the smell test. And you ask the average person over a beer, and I'm sure they would agree that there's something very, very wrong that has to be fixed.
Harper met with the head officials from the Republican Party recently. Does that show just how closely tied conservative forces are in Canada and the U.S.?
Oh, I think that they're pretty closely tied just because they have such a commonality of interest, and particularly at the executive level of large corporations. Of course, I don't think large corporations have any sense of citizenship or patriotism other than to the corporation itself and the making of money. And we're seeing this, getting back to what we said a little earlier, Jim, we're seeing this in a big way all around the world, particularly in the environmental field and allied fields, where corporations are actually running things. And they're telling legislators what to do, and legislators are doing it, and we seem to be powerless to do anything about it. And it goes back to what you said earlier. We've got to somehow find a way to keep that influence out, and the influence is usually expressed in money. And if we don't start doing that, we might as well throw up our hands and just let President Big Dome and the corporation tell us what to do forevermore. And that is, frankly, what's happening. You only have to look at this, Jim, and I'm a little nervous about saying this, but I'm going to. We have a new prime minister, goes to Paris, makes a hero of himself around the world, the glamour boy. He's the new environmental king around the world. He comes back to Canada, and God, he's hardly here long enough to have a cup of coffee before he's talking about new pipelines and new LNG plants and so on and so forth. The very antithesis of what he's been doing in Paris. Why did that happen? I don't think it's because Mr. Trudeau is the kind of person that just changes his mind instantly. I think he's come up against a great big cold pail of water called reality. The people that finance him, finance his party, and in essence finance the part of the government that he runs are putting the pressure on. And I don't know that they even have to physically or mentally put a lot of pressure on. I don't think they have to say a lot of things. I think they just have to give a little bit of a nod or a wink or a nudge, and he knows that he just can't do it. Now, again, as I say, I suppose you should blame the prime minister or the politician, but basically, we're all going to be corrupted if we're given the opportunity, I'm afraid to say. We've got to get rid of that opportunity, and It starts with Premier Clark and people like that. But if we don't address it and do something about it, we've only ourselves to blame.
Well, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, that's mostly secret still. A lot of people have no idea what's in it. It gives the right of corporations to sue if your environmental regulations, for example, hurt their profits.
Well, there I think it's a pretty good example of what we've been talking about. Nobody really knows what that damn thing says. When I say nobody, I mean people, the ordinary voter doesn't know. The whole thing was done secretly. It was sprung on people, and we're finding out bit by bit just the kind of thing that you've been telling us. And we're finding out that these things are obviously wrong and are going to bring evil in time to come. But it wasn't done democratically. Do you remember having a vote on this? Do you remember a candidate for a political party coming and saying, hey, Jim, we got a great idea with this Trans-Pacific Pact we're going to get into. Everybody's going to make a lot of money, and here are the details. Of course not. You didn't hear a thing about it. And this is what's happened. This is the corporatization of government. They don't think they have to anymore, so they don't. And we're paying.
If there's any dispute under the TPP, it will be solved by a trio of corporate lawyers who will arbitrate. And of course, will they rule against the corporation that, if they do rule against it, probably will ban these guys from working for anyone for the rest of their lives?
Well, of course, that's the reality of it, isn't it? And the dispute mechanism in NAFTA is bad enough, and it's better than this. But this one is just plain and simply a false front for the industrialists to do whatever they bloody well please. Now, I'm not against trade and industry and money making and entrepreneurship and all the rest of it, but I am very much against it if it's not fair, if it's not open, if there isn't a real remedy available to people who feel that they've been done wrong by the system. If you haven't got that, all you've got really is a sham. You've got like Soviet show trials of the 1930s. And that sounds excessive, but what's the difference? Nobody believes for 1 second that you're going to go into any of these institutions and get justice any more than you're going to get it from the National Energy Board or any one of the environmental assessment processes we have going on in Canada and BC. I mean, I've been to them, Jim. I've been to them so often that I've said before, probably here, I'd rather have a root canal without any anesthetic than go back and do another one, because they're so false, so fraudulent, so fixed, and yet that we're just putting up with that. We're not sort of rising as one and say throw the rascals out. We just go on from election to election, and when nothing changes, nothing changes. We're in trouble on this. We really are. It is, again, what I said before. It's corporatization. The corporations that used to be the friendly places we bought our groceries and our clothes and all the rest of it have now got so big, so strong, that they've taken over the levers of government. And they're supposed to be in our hands, not theirs.
Right. And for so long, people said it's exaggerated that the corporations are running things, but the Trans-Pacific Partnership totally shows they are.
Oh, no question about that. And, I think we have to also understand that they're human beings just like we are. And given temptations, it doesn't take very long before you convince yourself that you're actually doing God's work. And, this happens to everybody who gets into a position of power. And, it's like Lord Acton said, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's what we've allowed these companies to have, these corporations to have. Now, I just throw this out to your listeners. When you hear an executive tell you something about what the project is going to do or what it's not going to do, a pipeline, whether it's going to leak or not, etc., do you believe for 1 second a single thing that guy says? Of course you don't. And you don't believe the politician either. But what a sorry state we've got into when nobody is believed anymore when they're in authority. And this has happened because we've allowed the system to become corrupt. Now, there's always been that, of course. It's always been a little better kept under control. It's always been there. But it's now got totally and absolutely out of hand. And I'm not a religious guy, but what we honestly need is a Jesus to come into the temple and throw the moneylenders out. I mean, this it needs to be, we need a direct action against this. We've got to stop it.
Rafe, thanks a lot for chatting with us.
My pleasure, Jim, always. Thank you for having me.
My guest has been Rafe Mair, former BC Cabinet Minister. You're listening to the Goddard Report on TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. You can find us on YouTube at Talk Digital Network. Comments or questions for the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.